The ASC Rat Experiment by Luke Stevenson, V. Dakota Harsh, Rafe Buggio, and the Jasper Hartman. So, we began with the idea to figure out a way to expand our knowledge on human conditions, which we turned into experiments on a close relative rats. So, why rats? Rats are intelligent compared to other animals. Examples would be dolphins, monkeys, and apes. But those animals don't fit in my house. So this is why we're going with rats, because they are able to respond to similar stimuli to humans due to their brain structure being quite similar to humans. This is why they are perfect for our experiment on the measurement of brain activity before and after a stimuli is given. Getting into it. So, getting into the premise of the experiment. So, we went through a couple different experiment ideas, but finally settled on this one. Our experiment revolves around understanding the psychological effects of dopamine induced conditioning. The premise of this experiment is to find out whether or not a raised baseline of dopamine will cause the rats to be conditioned to certain habits. Sorry. We are giving rats a substance. Let's call it substance X. That raises their level of dopamine, and by playing Mr. Barrett's voice every time they ingest the substance to see if they become stimulated by his voice as a result of being conditioned to listen to it while under experimental conditions. We will measure their dopamine levels via brainwaves before the experiment without being conditioned to the substance, and after the experiment when they have been exposed to the substance. We will also record their behavioral patterns during the experiment to determine if there have been any significant changes when listening to Mr. Barrett's voice memo. Here's a short sample of his voice.
Y'all are disgusting.
So, process of obtaining the rats. Oh boy, this was a very long process that shouldn't have taken long, but there were a couple setbacks that were unexpected. So, first of all, when people think about buying a rat or a hamster, they think of Petco or some commercial store that sells pets. But we realized that when we called up Petco, we asked for pet rats. They said, "Do you want them frozen?" Turns out Petco and those stores, they sell them dead and frozen as snake food. So we cannot use a dead frozen rat in our experiment. So we also found other stores that weren't like commercial stores, but they were just random people that they also sold rats, but they weren't genetically identical, which is what we needed for this experiment. So after surfing Facebook for about an hour, we found this account called Rats to Richeries. No, Rats to Richeries Rattery uh, in Conroe, Texas. It's actually ran by this amazing woman called Angela Perez. She owns a rat slash, it's like a rescue adoption center for rats. What she does is she basically has around 30 cages in her house filled with rats. Don't ask me why, but that's just her thing. So we reached out to her and we talked about purchasing two twin female rats. Our reasoning for purchasing female rats is because female rats are a lot calmer than male rats. Therefore, it will make it easier to pick them up and put the brainwave scanner on them, and it just make the experiment run a lot smoother than having to catch a male rat running around the cage. So, after we reached out to her and talked to her about purchasing the rats, she said she'd give us a rough date when to go pick them up. And when we responded to go pick them up, she ghosted us. But after 2 weeks, she sent us this. Unfortunately, my phone didn't get the notification that she texted me back. So I sent her this instead. I apologize for not responding. I have been really busy with school and my cat recently has eye cancer. So I've had to take care of him and it's been a huge mess. My group has ordered pine bedding. Oh, that doesn't matter. It's just, it was a lot at that time. So after that, she responded and we got a date to pick them up. So we picked them up on October 28th. And we had to drive 1 hour to Conroe, Texas. So basically, what we did was we took a cardboard Amazon box and we poked a bunch of holes in them so the rats could breathe when we picked them up. And that allows for circulation and it's basically so the rats don't die. Um, when we arrived there, we talked to her. We bought a bunch of rat food, rat toys, all the good stuff. And we put the rats in the cardboard box and we drove 1 hour back to Houston. Well, that hour was very scary because the rats were trying to break out of the cardboard box and we had to keep picking them up and shoving them back in the box so they wouldn't run around my car or poop everywhere in there. And yeah, that basically sums up obtaining the rats. Building the brain scanner. So, this was actually a very interesting process that me, Rafay, Dakota, and Luke thoroughly enjoyed. So, what we did was we used a sensor that properly reads an electrical signals called BioAmp EXG pill that hooks up to a microcontroller to talk to the computer so we can properly visualize the data. The assembly and coding process was extremely complicated, and we had to swap out multiple parts because they were not all compatible with each other. For example, the sensor needed to be hooked up to a 5-volt microcontroller, but initially we had a 3.3 volt. So we ended up buying an Arduino Nano that worked perfectly with the BioAmp sensor. And what we did to test it out was we basically tested out on each other. I'd have Rafay test out the EEG on me, and it would work. Beginning the experiment. So, our experiment began recently and will span across another week or so. So, we do not have enough data to conclude our experiment. We will add this later on, obviously, as this is just a rough draft. But here is the electrical signals of the rats when exposed to Mr. Baird's voice memo before we began the experiment. So this right here on the screen is basically the rats' brainwaves before we have exposed them to the dopamine enhancer.